Okay, so you bought a gun. Now what? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you proper gun handling, how to store it safely, and we're going to go over the 4 cardinal rules of firearm safety. This is going to be episode 1 in a series of videos to build your confidence in weapon handling. I'm Delta 9 and this is Johnny Tactical. Okay, first things first, this is the gun that I'm going to be using for demonstration purposes. It's a SIG 229. You might have a different gun, but if it's a semi-automatic, like a modern semi-automatic handgun, it's all going to be very, very similar, so don't worry about that. The first thing we're going to go over, however, is the cardinal rules of firearm safety. If everybody followed these 4 rules, nobody would get hurt that wasn't supposed to. Rule number 1 is treat every gun as if it were loaded until you yourself have checked it. Rule number 2 is keep your finger off the trigger and outside of the trigger guard along the frame of the gun. Rule number 3 is don't point the gun at anything unless you've decided to destroy it. And rule number 4 is be sure of your target. What is beyond it, what is beside it, and what is between you and it. Those are your 4 rules, and if you follow those 4 rules, you're not going to have any issues at all. We're going to go over them one by one just to see what that looks like and how you actually apply that to the real world. Okay, so the first one is what? We're going to assume every gun is loaded until we ourselves have checked it. So this gun here lying on the table, is this loaded or unloaded? Well, we don't know, so we've got to check, right? So if I look at it real quick, you're going to see that there's a magazine in the magazine well. That's our first indicator that this gun might be loaded. And so how do we check that? First, we have to depress the magazine release. The magazine release is here, so we would have to depress that, and it's going to release the magazine. Again, for the purposes of like what we're doing here today, training, I have no live ammunition. There's no live ammunition here. I'm using these, I think these are called snap caps. These are basically dummy rounds. They look like this. They're inert. They cannot fire. All right, so going back to checking to see if this gun is loaded. The first thing we want to do is we're going to have to pick it up, right? We have to handle this gun in order to check to see if it's loaded or not. So first things first is what? We're going to follow those 4 cardinal rules of firearm safety. So we're going to treat this gun as if it were loaded. That means I'm not going to point it at anything and that I don't intend to destroy. So that means I have to point it in a safe direction. So a safe direction is simply this. It's simply 0 personal injury and minimal property damage. So if I did something dumb and negligently discharged this firearm and it fired into my desk here, and I'm in the basement, so the floor is concrete and I got an outside wall to my left, your right. If this gun went off because I pulled the trigger, there's going to be some property damage, minimal, but nobody's going to get hurt. So a safe direction is simply that. It's simply no personal injury, minimal property damage. Imagine, if you will, a laser coming out of the barrel of the gun. Anything it passes over, it's going to slice and cut and burn, and we don't want to pass anything in front of the muzzle of this gun because that is danger zone. My finger is going to be off the trigger, outside the trigger guard, and not only that, it's going to be along the frame of the pistol. So I'm not going to be doing this where my finger is just pulled away from the trigger guard. I'm actually going to want to touch the frame of the gun. That tells me that my finger is in a safe place, and if I am to squeeze really hard, I'm not going to get the sympathetic reflex and accidentally pull this trigger. So I'm going to press the release, the magazine release, and the magazine is going to come out. Now you notice there are rounds in this magazine. So these are the training rounds. They're inert, but there's rounds in this magazine. Is this gun safe yet? The answer is no. Why? Because we haven't actually looked inside. So what we have to do then is once the magazine is out, we have to lock the slide to the rear. So I'm going to not pass my hand in front of the barrel of the gun because that is the danger zone. We never want to point it at anything we don't intend to destroy, so that means it's got to be pointed in a safe direction, which is usually going to be towards the ground or towards the sky. And then just, again, anywhere that is safe, which is no personal injury, minimal property damage. And so once the magazine is out, I'm going to lock this slide to the rear. So this gun has my slide catch is here along the bottom of the frame of the gun. And on the slide, which is the top portion here, there is a little notch that will fit into the slide catch. And so we have to move it backward and push this up until it catches the slide. So it's going to look something like this. I'm a righty, so I have to look at it as I do it. Whoa, look at that. Whew, it was loaded after all. Whoa, good thing we're checking, right? I just push this slide to the rear. There's a spring inside here, which is what keeps it forward. So I just have to overpower that spring by pulling it back. And then as I pull back, I push up on my magazine catch, and it's what holds the slide in place. So I'll do it again so you can see. Whoop. So if I pull back, I'll just do it this way. And I push up with my thumb. So I want to do a push-pull. So a push, pull. Push, pull, and then I use my thumb and I push it up, and so that the slide catch fits in that groove on the slide, and that is how we lock the slide to the rear. So now what we have here, we have an open chamber. So how do I check to see if this is empty? I mean, is it empty now? I mean, I had a round come out, right? Well, again, maybe. So the best way to check to see if a gun is empty is I'm going to do 3 things, and I'm going to do it twice in a row. I'm going to look down the magazine well. That's where the magazine goes. That's why it's called a magazine well. So you would see if there was a magazine still in this, and if there was a round in that magazine, and I looked down it, that's what I would see. I would see the brass of the casing of the bullet, and that would tell me this gun has rounds in it. I don't want that. With the magazine out, I should be able to see all the way through and see daylight on the other side, okay? Second thing I'm going to check is the breech face. The breech face is the back portion here of the slide inside the chamber where the firing pin comes out. I should be able to see the little aperture of where the firing pin comes out. If I can see that, that tells me there's nothing in the way, there's no brass, there's no lead, there's nothing here that could go off if I were to pull the trigger. Okay, so magazine well, breech face. Then I'm going to tip the gun this way, and I'm going to look down at the opening to the barrel, which is the breech of my muzzle where the round would go if it were loaded. So if I were to look down there and I were to see the back of one of these rounds, I would know that there is a round in the chamber. So it would look something like this. Basically what I'm going to be looking at is I'm going to be looking down inside the breech, and I'll be looking for brass. So again, these are training rounds. These are red in color. You'd be seeing like silver, nickel, brass, or steel casing. And if I see the primer, that means I'm looking at a round, and that means this gun could fire if the slide were forward. But in this case, we know that it ejected when I pulled the slide back, so there shouldn't be anything in there, but that's what I'm checking. So here's the order. Come across the gun, I assume it's loaded. Okay, then I'm going to keep my finger off the trigger, outside the trigger guard, and along the frame of the firearm. It's going to be pointed in a safe direction, which is no personal injury, 0 property damage. I release the magazine. Now I lock the slide to the rear. And then I visually and physically inspect this pistol. So, magazine well, breech face, breech, magazine well, breech face, breech. I'm going to check twice, and to even emphasize it even more so, I'm going to look away in between. So it's going to look like this. Slides, magazine's out, slides locked to the rear. I'm going to visually and physically inspect this weapon. Magazine well, breech face, breech. Look away, magazine well, breech face, breech. Visually and physically inspect. There's nothing in here. This gun is now empty. The universal symbol that this gun is empty is it's locked to the rear. This tells everyone that's around, like maybe you're on the range with some friends or you're at a training or whatever. I would never leave this gun like this. Why does the order matter? What if I do this? Is this gun safe now? No, it's not. Why? because it's a semi-automatic pistol. So every time the slide goes backwards and comes forward, it takes a round off the top of this magazine and loads it into the breech, like this. Oh, there's another one. There's another one. Okay, that's how it's designed to work. So, if I do this and then do this, this gun is hot. I can fire one round. This gun will fire with no magazine and a round in the chamber. The order matters. That's just getting back to that. The order matters. That means the magazine has to come out first, because now nothing else it's got no food source to feed the gun, right? The magazine and the ammunition in it is like a food source, like a Pez dispenser, okay? Every time there's one in here, the next one's gonna come out every time this slide goes forward and back, forward and back. And this is not a safe gun. Again, magazine has to come out first, then I'm gonna push pull, and I lock the slide to the rear using the slide catch in my thumb, and a round ejected, which means it was in the chamber. But I'm going to check. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that maybe my gun had a malfunction or a piece broke and it didn't eject properly. Maybe my extractor's broken or my ejector's broken, and it didn't actually pull the round out of the chamber. So that's why I have to check with my eyes and feel with my fingers to make sure this weapon's empty. So I look down the magazine well, breech face, breech. I look away, magazine well, breech face, breech. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for brass. I'm looking for the nickel casing, a brass casing, a steel casing, or in this case, a red training round. I don't see anything with my eyes. Now, lighting could be low, right? So I might have to use a flashlight or whatever. Or there's other reason why I use my hands. I'm gonna feel around in there and I shouldn't feel anything. If I do, the gun's not safe. Treat it as such. All right, so that's going to conclude our first episode in the series of firearms familiarization, getting back to the basics. Come back for episode 2, where we're going to address firearm storage and also how to carry it, different methods and different concerns that come about with carrying your firearm. Please like and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and share it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I'm Delta 9, and this is Johnny Tactical.